Giovanni was a man well known in his hometown of Turin. His gray hair, neatly combed back, and slightly hunched posture revealed the years that had been lived with purpose. At 60, he was the embodiment of wisdom and quiet strength that only decades of life could bring. Giovanni had been through much. He lost his beloved wife, raised 3 children, and became a grandfather to 7 grandchildren. Yet despite all of this, he still felt a profound sense of loneliness, especially during the long winter evenings when the silence in his house became almost palpable. One way he dealt with his solitude was through the online chat for the city of Turin. There he found not only old friends, but also new ones, and those interested in the history of his beloved city. For Giovanni, the chat became a window into a world filled with lively conversations, memories of the past, and friendly banter. He eagerly shared his knowledge of Turin, from the history of the Shroud of Turin to the little-known streets where the best espresso could be found in quaint old cafes. Thousands of miles away from Turin, in a cozy Chicago suburb, lived Jane. At 55, she too knew what loneliness felt like. After the sudden loss of her husband, she threw herself into work to fill the void, but eventually realized that it wasn't enough. She had always been drawn to history and faith, and one day she decided to study the Shroud of Turin more deeply. In the course of her research, she stumbled upon the very chat Giovanni frequented. Her attention was immediately caught by his messages, full of love for his city and a genuine interest in history. "I've always felt like there's something mystical about Turin," she wrote one day. "Maybe it has to do with the shroud, but something in your descriptions makes me feel like I've been there before, even though I haven't." Giovanni didn't take long to reply. "Turin is a city that lives in the heart of everyone who's seen it," he wrote back. "But I'm sure it's not just about the city. You probably have that rare gift of seeing beauty where others don't." Their conversation quickly turned into a long and lively exchange. Giovanni shared stories from his life, memories of his childhood in the bustling courtyards of Turin, and the first time he saw the shroud when he was still a boy. Jane, in turn, spoke of her family, of how her late husband had taken her on museum trips and how faith had always been a source of comfort for her. After a few days of messaging, Giovanni suggested they switch to a more convenient platform for chatting. "If you'd like, I can tell you more in a messenger app," he wrote. "It's too limiting here for words." Jane hesitated a little. His offer was unexpected, but she didn't want to decline. She felt that with every message, something more than just friendship was beginning to form between them. It felt like a warm beam of light was entering her life through her computer screen. "Sure," she agreed. "I think that's a good idea." And so, their story began. At first, they exchanged messages every few days, sharing stories that seemed to fill the empty spaces in their hearts. Gradually, their communication became more regular. Giovanni spoke of Turin's ancient buildings, each of which had its own legend. Jane shared her thoughts on the books she had read and her dreams of travel. For both of them, these conversations became more than just chats. They brought life to their days, joy to their hearts, and reminded them that life could still be full of meaning even after loss. As time passed, a bond formed between them, one that knew no boundaries of time or distance. Messaging each other had become a daily ritual for Giovanni and Jane. They exchanged long messages that filled their days with meaning. Giovanni eagerly shared stories about the Shroud of Turin, a relic he considered not only a historical artifact, but also a spiritual connection between generations. He described how it was displayed every 5 years, turning Turin into the center of global attention. The next exhibition was set for July 2020, and Giovanni dreamed of the day when Jane could see it with her own eyes. "We still have a year and a half until the event," he wrote. "But while we have time, we can just enjoy our conversations. I think I'll tell you everything there is to know about Turin, down to the smallest details." Jane smiled as she read his messages. It felt like she was discovering a whole new world. Turin came to life for her through Giovanni's words. Her imagination painted pictures of narrow cobblestone streets, ancient cathedrals whose towers reached for the sky, and the warm atmosphere of cafes where they served fragrant espresso. She started asking more questions about the city, about how it had changed over the years, and even about Giovanni's childhood. When I was a kid, Turin was a bit different, he shared. The streets seemed wider and the days longer. I remember racing with my friends at Piazza Castello, where we'd race wooden toy cars. And now, I mostly sit at the cafe on the corner, where they served espresso even when I was 10. Funny, huh? Jane replied that she'd love to visit Turin one day, and maybe even stroll through those same streets. She shared stories of her life in the suburbs of Chicago, the quiet mornings when she woke to the sound of birds singing, and the evenings when she longed for company. Slowly, their conversations grew deeper and warmer. I have 3 kids, Jane wrote one day. They're all grown now, living their own lives. I'm proud of them, but sometimes it feels like they forget about me, not because they don't care, but because they're busy. So your messages are like a ray of light for me. With you, it feels like someone sees me as more than just a mom or grandma, but as Jane. Giovanni was touched by her words. He felt that he had found not just a conversation partner in Jane, but a kindred spirit. He too knew what loneliness felt like when children get caught up in their own lives and days start to blend together. You know, I feel that way too, he replied. Sometimes it feels like I'm just Grandpa Giovanni or the guy who can talk about Turin. But with you, I feel like I'm just a man again, someone who can share something important. You help me remember that inside, I'm still the same person I was when I was young. They began sharing details of their daily lives. Jane talked about her attempts to cook something new, like the lasagna Giovanni had mentioned. He, in turn, described walks along the Po River inspired by the evening sunset. These small moments became threads that wove their lives together. One day, Giovanni wrote, "You know, Jane, it feels like our conversations are like a bridge between 2 shores. We come from different lives, different countries, but in these messages, we find something in common that connects us. I never thought someone I've never met could become so close." Jane thought about his words. Indeed, over the few months they had been talking, she realized how much she looked forward to his messages. Her days were filled with meaning again, and she had started to dream and plan once more. She wanted to know more about Turin, about Giovanni, about his life. It was something new and incredibly moving. "You're right, Giovanni," she replied. "Our conversations really are building a bridge, and you know, I'm starting to believe that one day, I'll be able to walk across that bridge and see everything with my own eyes." Those words warmed Giovanni's heart. He felt that their friendship, or maybe something more, was blossoming like a flower pushing through the snow. And though there was still much unknown ahead, he knew one thing for sure. These first steps were just the beginning of their shared story. By December 2018, the relationship between Giovanni and Jane had started to develop quickly. It wasn't something they had planned or forced. It was simply that they kept talking, discussing everything from serious topics to the tiniest details of everyday life. Their conversations were light but deep at the same time. Giovanni opened up to Jane in a way he hadn't with anyone since the loss of his wife. For Jane, this communication became a quiet refuge after many years of loneliness. Each day they learned more about each other. Giovanni shared his memories of his youth, the years he spent with his wife, and the joy of being a father and grandfather. His stories about noisy Sunday family dinners and sunny walks through the old streets of Turin transported Jane to another world. She, in turn, talked about her life in a small town in America, where she'd always loved watching the seasons change and finding comfort in books and music. It was in December that Giovanni realized he felt something more for Jane than simple affection. One evening, as they were discussing their childhood dreams, he suddenly realized that her laughter had become the most precious sound in the world to him. "Jane, you know what I'm thankful for?" he asked one evening, his voice softer than usual. "And what's that?" she replied, smiling. "That you brought me back to life. I used to just exist, but now I have something that makes me look forward to every day." Her heart swelled at his words. She knew she felt something similar for Giovanni, but was afraid to admit it to herself. Jane had lived for years protecting her heart from new heartbreak, but Giovanni was different. He was sincere, warm, and most importantly, he wasn't rushing her. Everything changed in February 2019 when Giovanni sent her a letter. an actual letter on paper in an envelope with an Italian stamp. Jane remembered how carefully she opened it, feeling her heart race. The letter was filled with his words of love, his dreams, and hopes. "You are more to me than just a friend," he wrote. "I'm in love with you, Jane. You're the one who's brought light back into my life, light I had long since given up on seeing." Jane read the letter several times, trying to grasp the power of those words. She hesitated for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Inside, she was torn between the fear of losing someone close to her again and the desire to finally be happy. But in the end, she decided to take the risk. "You're the most sincere and caring person I've ever met," she wrote back. "I love you too, Giovanni. I never thought I could feel this again." From that point on, their relationship moved to a new level. Giovanni, being the passionate Italian that he was, couldn't resist showing his care and attention. He began sending her small packages with Italian delicacies, olive oil, pasta, homemade sauces. One day, he sent her a box of lemons grown in his garden, signing it with the words, "Now there will be more sunshine in your life." Their daily video calls turned into a true ritual. They had dinner together, discussing the dishes they were cooking and sharing the events of the day. Giovanni showed her his favorite places in Turin through his phone's camera, while Jane talked about her walks in her hometown. Their connection grew stronger, despite the miles that separated them. Giovanni started learning English to understand Jane better, and she, in turn, learned a few phrases in Italian. When she first said "ti amo" to him, he couldn't hold back his tears. For him, it was more than just words, it was proof that their feelings were real. But despite all the joy, Giovanni couldn't shake one fear. He knew that their relationship needed more than just conversations and letters. They had to meet in person to find out if their love could withstand the reality of being together. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he believed that Jane was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. "I know this is bold," he said to her one day, "but I want you to come to Turin. I want to show you everything that's meaningful to me. I want you to meet my family." Jane smiled. She knew this step would change everything, but she was ready. Giovanni had become more to her than just a friend or even a lover. He had become her support, her inspiration, and her new hope. By the spring of 2019, Giovanni and Jane couldn't imagine their lives without their daily conversations. Despite the miles that separated them, they had grown closer than many couples living side by side. Their talks now covered not only the events of the day or memories from the past, but also dreams of the future. And in those dreams, there was always one constant desire: to meet face to face. Giovanni, a man used to action, soon started to come up with a plan. He was sure that such a meeting needed a special occasion, something that would make the moment unforgettable. After much thought, he concluded that the best time would be the summer of 2020, during the exhibition of the Shroud of Turin. He could already picture showing Jane the magnificent cathedrals and old streets of Turin, standing together in front of the holy relic, holding each other's hands. "We'll start in Turin, and then I'll take you to the Ligurian coast," he said one evening during a video call. His eyes sparkled with excitement. "You love the sea, right?" "I do," Jane replied with a smile. "But you know, for me, it's not the place that matters, but the person I'm sharing it with." Giovanni laughed. "Then you'll definitely love my company," he said with a friendly confidence. Despite her joy, Jane felt a tinge of unease. She had never left the United States before and rarely traveled even within the country. Her life had always revolved around family and work, and now at 55, she found herself facing an opportunity that frightened her with its unfamiliarity. "But what if I can't do it?" she asked one evening, as their conversation turned to her potential trip to Italy. "You can do it," Giovanni replied gently. "You're stronger than you think, and if you decide to go, I'll do everything to make it your most memorable experience." Giovanni's words soothed her doubts. His confidence and care reminded her that she wasn't alone. She started imagining herself standing next to him on the narrow streets of Turin, trying Italian espresso in a small cafe, hearing his voice not through a screen, but in person. Spring passed in planning and dreaming. Giovanni told her about every corner of Turin he wanted to show her. He painted such vivid pictures with his words that Jane almost felt like she was already there. One day he sent her pictures of his garden, with blooming lemon trees casting shadows on the old stone house. "This is where we'll have breakfast," he wrote in the accompanying note. "Imagine, fresh bread, homemade jam, and coffee, and I'll be sitting across from you." Jane responded with a photo of her favorite park. The picture showed benches hidden in greenery and a pond with ducks. "This is where I'll show you my world if you ever come to America," she wrote. "You don't mind such humble places, do you?" Giovanni was thrilled. To him, everything about Jane was special. By the summer of 2019, their relationship had grown so close that Giovanni decided to take another important step. He suggested introducing Jane to his family via video call. This proposal threw her into a bit of confusion. She understood how important his children's approval was, but she feared she wouldn't make the right impression. "They'll love you," Giovanni assured her. "You're kind, smart, and sincere. It's obvious right away." The day of the introduction was set for Easter. That day, Jane felt like she was about to take an exam. Her phone trembled in her hands as she connected to the call. Smiling faces appeared on the screen. Giovanni's children and grandchildren. They welcomed her warmly, asked about her life, and laughed at the stories Giovanni told. "Dad has never looked this happy," said one of his daughters, Laura, as the conversation turned to more personal topics. "Thank you for that." These words touched Jane deeply. She realized that her doubts had been unfounded. Giovanni's family had truly embraced her with open hearts. That evening, for the first time, she felt like there could be a new future for her, one that included love, family, and happiness. After Easter, their connection grew even stronger. They started discussing not only their travel plans, but also longer-term things. Giovanni began talking about coming to America to meet her children. "I know it won't be easy," he said one day, "but if you think they'll accept me, I'll do everything to earn their trust." Jane, for her part, began to think about what their relationship might look like in real life. She understood that age, distance, and cultural differences were obstacles they would have to overcome. But her heart told her it was ready. When Giovanni once said, "I know we didn't meet by chance," Jane smiled. She too felt that their story had been destined like a gift from fate that couldn't be passed up. On March 1st, Jane sent Giovanni a package for his birthday. She carefully selected each item she placed in the box, hoping to give him something special. Inside was Giovanni's favorite thing, a cashmere sweater, soft and warm, just like care itself, a scarf, delicate and elegant, and a cap. An accessory Giovanni always wore with pride, like it was a part of his identity. Jane hoped that this gift, though modest, would convey all her warmth and love, even though she couldn't be there with him to support him on his special day. He was on the other side of the world, and although the distance between them was significant, they always found a way to feel close. Jane often imagined him opening the box, and her heart would fill with tenderness. On March 7th, Giovanni finally received the package and immediately wrote to her. "You take care of me better than anyone in the world," he said, and his words were full of sincere gratitude. Jane, despite not hearing his voice, felt the warmth of his words through the screen. In return, she sent him a heart emoji, hoping he'd feel just how much she loved him. But when Giovanni sent her a photo of himself wearing the new sweater, Jane immediately noticed that something was off. His face looked pale, and his eyes were tired, as if he hadn't slept. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and even the cozy sweater couldn't hide how he looked. He wasn't his usual self. "You don't look well, Giovanni. Please go see a doctor," she wrote right away, unable to hide her worry. She remembered him mentioning a mild cold a few days ago, but now it seemed so much worse. He stayed silent for a while and then responded, as always, trying to reassure her. "It's just a cold, don't worry, I'll be fine in a couple of days." But Jane knew him too well. There was fatigue in his messages that hadn't been there before. He'd always been strong, confident, someone who knew how to handle anything, but now she could see he was giving up. Giovanni's body was clearly failing him. She wrote again. "I'm worried, Giovanni. Please don't put off seeing a doctor. I can't be there, but I can at least ask you to take care of yourself. You need to do this." Giovanni replied a few hours later, and this time his words didn't sound as certain as before. Okay, Jane, I'll go. Just don't worry too much. It's really not that serious. But inside, Jane was torn. She knew this wasn't just a cold. Every time he sent her a message, she felt his strength slipping away. He was becoming weaker, and his words lost the confidence she'd always loved in him. The man she'd shared all her feelings with, the one who had always seemed invincible, was now becoming more and more vulnerable. Every morning, Jane would wake up and check her phone first thing, hoping for an encouraging message from Giovanni. She saw his latest words, and her heart would clench. Giovanni seemed to keep hiding his pain, but she could feel his words getting shorter, his messages coming less frequently. He kept assuring her everything was fine, but she knew that behind each message was something more than just a cold. Every letter, every word, was filled with longing and unspoken fear. "Are you feeling better today?" she asked one evening. "A little," he replied, "but maybe I should rest some more." Jane felt a wave of fear grip her heart. She knew he would never be like this if it wasn't serious. Giovanni was the type of man who never gave in to weakness, the one who always fought until the end. But now he was talking like he really didn't have the strength anymore. That evening, Jane couldn't sleep. She kept going over his messages, trying to figure out what was hidden behind his words. He hadn't written anything that pointed to danger, but she could feel that it was more than just exhaustion. She decided to write him once more. "Giovanni, I can't stay calm anymore. I want you to take care of yourself. You're too important to me." Giovanni replied almost immediately, and this time his words were especially short. "I know. Thank you for being here." In that phrase, Jane felt more than in all his previous messages. He had never been this vulnerable, and now she knew that she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to do something to help him, so he wouldn't lose his strength, so he wouldn't give up. She sat down at her computer and started looking for ways to support him, ways to make him feel that he wasn't alone. In that moment, Jane realized she was ready to do anything to be with him, despite the distance. She sent him another message, full of hope and love. "I'm with you, Giovanni. You're not alone." He replied almost instantly, "I know. And that's the most important thing." With each passing day, his weakness became more evident, and Jane could feel that their bond was growing even deeper, despite the physical distance. She couldn't be there, but she did everything she could to support him with her words, to remind him that he wasn't alone. But with each day, her worry grew. The days dragged on like endless hours, and each one began for Jane with the hope that today he would write. She sat at her screen, her fingers lightly touching the keys, sending a piece of her soul with every message, but there was no response. Sometimes she thought maybe Giovanni was just busy, that work or internet issues had blocked his ability to write. She tried not to think the worst. He had said he was struggling, that he was sick, but she believed it was temporary. Jane knew that people can't always share everything going on in their lives. Sometimes silence seemed more understandable than words. But now the silence had become unbearable. He hadn't responded for 3 days, and she kept writing, her short, hopeful messages. "How are you? I miss you so much." She didn't know what had happened, didn't know why he hadn't written. Giovanni, the man who had meant so much to her, the man who had entered her life at the most unexpected moment, was gone without a trace. Every moment she waited for him to write again, for her to hear his voice in his words. She waited, and her heart was torn with every new day of waiting. Then one morning, as Jane was starting to check her email, she saw a new message. It came from his daughter. Just the thought of a message from Giovanni's daughter sent a wave of anxiety through her chest, a foreboding sign of bad news. The message was short and simple, but for Jane, it felt like a death blow. In its dry words, there was a heaviness that no punctuation could convey. "I'm sorry to write this," the letter began. "My father passed away from COVID." In that moment, the world around Jane, which had seemed so solid and reliable, collapsed like a house of cards. Emotions flooded in so quickly she barely had time to process them. Her eyes blurred with tears, her breathing quickened, her heart pounded in her chest. Everything she had hoped for, everything she had been waiting to hear, was now impossible. Giovanni was gone. He wouldn't write anymore, wouldn't share his thoughts, wouldn't offer the quiet, deep connection that had meant so much to her. She couldn't believe it. She sat there, staring at the screen, as if trying to squeeze a thought, any reality that could explain her feelings. But no thought came. There was nothing but pain. And along with that pain, something else began to rise inside her. Gratitude. Gratitude for having had him in her life, for the chance to feel alive again, for his words, his attention, making her believe in love, in the possibility of two souls connecting, even across thousands of miles. He had been the light that had guided her through dark days. He was the one who taught her to dream, the one who made her feel she was capable of emotions again. "I'll remember you always, Giovanni," she whispered aloud, not knowing that in doing so, she was comforting herself. She knew he was gone, and that there would be no more conversations, no more words from him. But despite the depth of her loss, she felt gratitude for his existence, for his part in her life. Jane was so consumed by her grief that she didn't notice how the hours turned into days. She didn't know what to do with the empty, cold feeling that filled her heart. How to go on when her soul felt torn, when a part of her had gone with him? And yet, in her memory, she held on to those moments, those words, those silent, sometimes so sincere exchanges of thoughts and emotions. The night they first met wasn't just a meeting with a person for her. It was a meeting with the possibility of being truly loved. That night became a revelation. In his eyes she saw a reflection of her own feelings, and his letters became her dear companions through the lonely days. He had become her friend, the kind of friend she hadn't had in a long time. They weren't tied by the threads of ordinary life. They were connected by something more subtle than space and time. Now Jane was left alone. But this loneliness wasn't just emptiness. It was a weight, a silence that had fallen over her, one that defied explanation. She didn't know what she was feeling. All her being felt hollow, but in that emptiness, despite the pain, there remained the memory of him, of Giovanni. She sat in silence for a long time, thinking about what to do with this pain, how to continue her life when part of her had gone with him. But she knew time would eventually put everything in its place. Though the wounds of his loss would always be with her, she understood that he had left her something important: the ability to love, to believe, and to hope. These feelings, which he had brought, wouldn't disappear. They would stay forever. And though Jane's heart was broken, she believed that one day she would find the light he had given her once more, even if that light now seemed so far away.